Love finances the other F word and want to support the show? Become a patron by going to patreon.com/FTOFW. You'll get special features, a shout out on the air, and early releases. Or if you prefer, pick up some merchandise at financestheotherfword.com.
As fantastic a CFP as Mel O is, as wonderful an attorney as I am, and as good as Stormy is at whatever it is he does, please do note that anything said in our podcasts are our opinions alone and are not meant to be taken as financial or legal advice.
Welcome to Finances, the Other F Word, a Gen Xer podcast for musicians and music lovers, where we discuss money and music without all the pretentious bullshit. Here are your hosts, Zoe Terry, attorney at large, Stormy Andrews, founder of Yokel Local Marketing, and Mel O, certified financial planner and author of Finances, the Other F Word. Listener discretion is advised.
Hey guys, welcome to Finances the Other F Word, and we have a fantastic fucking guest on the show for you today, but I'm going to actually kick it over to Stormy so that he can introduce him.
Yeah, I'm super excited. You know what? Because we have Ruben on the show today, and Ruben is someone who is very special in my life. He's actually the very first mentor I ever had in my adult life. As a matter of fact, for those of you that are fortunate enough to have the book, The World's Best Buyer Persona System, I thank a lot of the mentors that I've had over the years, and he's the very first name that is listed in the book in regards to my mentor. So very, very important to me. We met in California. I haven't seen Ruben in ages. So it's super cool to get him on the show, because one of the reasons I've been wanting to get Ruben on the show is because he has such an incredible Beatles collection. To me, he is like a Beatles encyclopedia or Wikipedia or anything that ends with pedia. Beatlepedia is probably what we should call him. He's a Beatlepedia, just an incredible collection. You can see, for those of you that are watching this on video, you can see part of his collection behind him. For those of you that are listening to this on audio, you're really missing out. And I'm so excited to have Ruben joining us today on Finances, the Other F Word. Ruben, thanks for coming in, man.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
No, hey, so Ruben, you know what? I told my co-hosts or my hosts, whatever you want to call them. I was about to go in a different direction, but I won't. But about you and your collection. So can you just tell us a little bit about your collection, and then we'll dive in and we'll let Mel O take it over. And then we do have, for authenticity, it's kind of cool. We have Zoe here because we have a Brit, so she can qualify and quantify whatever you have to say about the Beatles to tell us if it's true.
That's kind of a stretch, but okay.
That's great. Well, first of all, I got to say, I began my collection, part of what you see behind me, in January of 1964 is when I first began collecting my Beatle memorabilia. And I'm very fortunate. I was born at a good time. I was born 1 year and 1 month prior to John Lennon and Paul McCartney meeting, which they met in July of 1957, and I was born the year prior to that. So I came at a good time. And between 57 and 63, most Americans had never heard of the Beatles. And during that time, they were quite popular in Europe, mostly in Liverpool, London, and Hamburg, Germany, where they would play most of their gigs. And they were perfecting their craft during that time. Luckily, they met George Martin, who was a very popular producer in England, who really set them in the right direction of how to record music. And they did so beginning January 62. And in 1962 and 63, they released a series of new music to the public. And it was unheard of still in the United States. But a lot of that music really generated from the United States, because they took our R&B music and put their English spin on it. And people in Europe went nuts. Well, George Martin came to Capitol Records, which was EMI was the parent company, or Parlophone to EMI, or to Capitol, that is, to release the Beatles music in 1963. Well, Capitol didn't think they were going to go anywhere, so they wouldn't release any of their music. So George Martin basically said, "Well, if you're not going to release our music, I'm going to shop it around to see who will in the United States," and he did. Smaller labels like Atco at the time, Tolly Records, VJ, got hold of some of these Beatle recordings and released them in 1963, and unfortunately, they didn't sell. So Capitol thought they felt pretty good about their decision not to lose money on the Beatles in '63. Well, Ed Sullivan happened to be in England in the latter part of '63 and saw the big commotion at the airport, thought maybe the Queen was coming in because the Beatles were arriving from Germany at the time. And somebody told Ed Sullivan that, well, this isn't the Queen, this is the Beatles. And Ed Sullivan had never heard of them. Well, to make a long story short, he found out what they were all about and invited the Beatles to his show. And the Beatles had a little theory or a roadmap of what they were going to do, and that is they were not going to come to the United States unless they had a #1 record. Well, what they did in the latter part of 1963, they recorded "I Want to Hold Your Hand" specifically for the American audience, and George Martin thought that would be the perfect record that could possibly launch them. So a lot of things were happening in late '63, early '64. Ed Sullivan, the Beatles recording "I Want to Hold Your Hand," and the Beatles also released their second album in England, and it was called "With the Beatles," which is different than the American version, and I'll get to that in a minute. Ironically, "With the Beatles" was released on November 22nd, 1963. The irony to that is that's the same day that John F. Kennedy was shot and killed. And in America, we went into mourning, and none of you on this call were around at that time. But let me tell you, it was every bit or as much as the 9/11 day that happened here in the United States, which we can all relate to. As a child, I realized there was nothing going to be on television for what I thought was going to be a day or two. It turned out to be about 7 days. Every channel was covering the Kennedy assassination, and we went into deep mourning. Again, that "With the Beatles" in England was released on the same exact day. And I'll tell you how that's ironic, because many historians feel that the Americans went into mourning on that day, November 22nd, and life was never going to be the same. But "I Want to Hold Your Hand" started climbing the charts in late '63 and January of 1964. And it was what most historians have said led us out of that mourning state of mind, because "I Want to Hold Your Hand" started climbing the charts in January '64 and was a #1 song by late January, early February 1964. At that point, the Beatles agreed to go on the Ed Sullivan Show, which happened on February 9th, 1964. So there's a whole gamut of what happened with Americans going on during that time, the Beatles not being accepted in America in '62, '63, while George Martin was trying to distribute that music or their music, but it was so much different than anything that was going on. And in the music world, and by the way, I'm a bit of a historian myself, but in the music world, payola was a big thing in 1959, where disc jockeys were being paid to play music at a rate much higher than what the normal playlist would be. Well, the record industry from '59 to '63 was homogenized. Nothing against Fabian, the Bobbies, which were the Bobby V, the Bobby Vinton, the other very homogenized rock and rollers at the time, got a lot of airplay. And unfortunately, rock music in the early 1960s wasn't quite the same as it was in the '50s because of payola. Well, the Beatles had a whole different sound than what was going on at the time. And the new teenagers of the day really latched on to what the Beatles sounded like. They were so much different than what had been going on the previous few years because of what had happened in the late '50s with payola, that they accepted the Beatles. And "I Want to Hold Your Hand" was the perfect song for them to be on the airwaves. And it was such a big hit with the teenagers at the time and young adults that those original records that George Martin distributed in 1963 were finally accepted by Capitol. But those small record labels, which had limited distribution, which was one of the reasons why the music didn't do well in 63 for the Beatles, they finally says, Capitol, we own these rights and we're going to distribute them finally. People want more music from the Beatles. So I Want to Hold Your Hand was the first to really make the charts, become a #1 song. And all those other songs like She Loves You, Please Please Me, Love Me Do, which got no airplay in 1963, got plenty of airplay as soon as the Beatles were on the Ed Sullivan Show, which was February 9th. I was very fortunate, by the way, and Stormy knows this. There's a picture right behind me, and you can't see it from here, but maybe later I can get it for you. That is an outtake picture that only 2,500 of these outtake pictures were made available to people who were in the know to get this picture. And I'm very fortunate that it's #2
Wow.
in the print list. Only the person who had the negative is at #1. So I was very fortunate to get that picture. It's a picture that's not seen by most people, and it was taken from somebody working as a stagehand and was never ever published. So when I got my hands on that print, I blew it. I framed it. I made it look really good. I didn't have to blow it up. It was that size when I got it. And it's a very unique picture because it's moments before the Beatles went on the air. And obviously via DVD or whatever, you can see the entire first show of Ed Sullivan on DVD, but this is moments before that. So I felt very fortunate. And as you could tell, I centered it amongst my Beatles singles.
Yeah, and I was going to ask, so a couple things. You were saying that the smaller independent labels who had the balls to take the chance on the Beatles, when Capitol came in, when they saw that they were such a success, Capitol came in and tried to basically yoink all of the rights from them, and the smaller independent labels was like, fuck that, you're not doing that.
Exactly.
And they bought Capitol, and then they were able to distribute it themselves. So Capitol didn't distribute any, or did they have to pay the small labels?
Yes and no. That the small labels saw this as an opportunity to make some money. So they were the first to distribute the singles. And after those songs went up and down the charts, then they sold at a premium price to Capitol the rights to those songs. And Capitol re-released them again on their label and then included them on a collection of albums that they released throughout 1964. But those small labels had their first shot at getting them out. They weren't prepared to distribute them nationwide because a lot of those were regional labels. So it's a yes and no. Capitol eventually got the rights, released them on albums, but the smaller labels were able to do that. And those small labels, the 45s are getting more and more difficult to find. This is pre-internet. There used to be a magazine called Goldmine Magazine, if you're familiar with that. And what that was, it was nothing but ads of vinyl records that were listed in this magazine. And that magazine was quite large. It was typically, it came out on a weekly basis, typically around 100 pages of nothing but ads for vinyl records. And you have to, and we used the honor system back then, pre-internet, pre-PayPal. We literally wrote a check, dropped it in the mail, and hoped that we got the record that we had agreed to purchase. Luckily, and this is really a credit to Beatle fans worldwide, because I bought some from England and I bought some mostly from the United States. Nobody burned me. Every check I put in the mail, I got the record I wanted, and I did my research to find all those little private labels, and I have them all.
So
wait a second. Did you say you have the private labels? You actually have the albums from those. You have every one of the albums from those little small record companies?
Yes, and the singles.
Okay.
And that was going to be part of my question. So the thing is that, sometimes when they're on independent, they record them. Obviously, it's kind of like not really their demo, but it's their first release. And then when it moves to a major record label, they either have them re-recorded or they polish them up. So do they sound, I see that they're on display there. So maybe at one point you played them or not, but do they sound different? Like if you take one song from the private label versus when it moved over to Capitol, does it sound the same?
It sounds the same.
Oh, shit. Okay.
Yeah,
Right on.
yeah. There was no improvement or loss of fidelity. It was the way that EMI had released them from England, and they sound the same. Now, little asterisk to that. Um, everything had pretty much everything the Beatles have ever done has been re-released multiple times, and many of these mono original tapes have been re-released in stereo and then re-released again as a remix, have been re-released again in uh, uh, what's the right what's the word I'm looking for? Uh, can't think of it right now. But anyway, it's been re-released in many different formats
Right.
from those master recordings. Oh, I got this came back to me. Remasters. That's the word I'm looking for. As you've probably heard the word remaster, remastered means they went through and digitally cleaned up a lot of the analog original tapes and set them out again. And now, most recently, with the 3 box sets that have just been re-released on the 50th anniversary of Sgt. Pepper, the 50th anniversary of the White Album, and the 50th anniversary of Abbey Road, it has been remixed and remastered. What's the difference? Remastered is just the digital cleanup of the original tape. Remixed is they went and took all the tracks and separated them digitally from what used to start off as 4 tracks and then 8 tracks, have separated 64 tracks. And George Martin, who I mentioned earlier, his son now who has the rights now to go, who has been given the right by the Beatles themselves and their estates to go back and remix these original mono tapes. And what that means is now digitally, instrument by instrument, sound by sound, they are enhanced. And you would swear that they were recorded yesterday. They are so clean on these 50th anniversary box sets. And by the way, the Let It Be box set, it's coming this fall. And along with the movie, and I understand it's going to be a 3-episode. Each episode is going to be 2 hours long. And it was just announced yesterday that it's going to be on the Disney Channel. I don't work for Disney, no promo here, but it's on its way, along with the box set. And the box sets are amazing. They are, there's a lot of tidbits of information that I didn't even know that's on there. But let me just back up a little bit. A lot of what I have, which is unique from the average Beatle fan, is I picked up a bootleg vinyl in the 60s, 70s, mostly in the 70s and 80s, which was snuck out of Abbey Road's studios. And I was fortunate enough to have those links of people who would go to England every other month and come back with a whole array of sounds and songs that were never released commercially. And I had first access to them. So I felt a lot of things went my way in life. And that was one of them when it comes to the Beatles.
So
And I had first dibs on everything that came back to the States, and I picked them out. And many of that is behind me. And I'll just show you above those singles. You'll see there's my bootlegs are up on top there. And I picked up John Lennon bootlegs, which is called the Lost Lennon tapes. A lot of stuff he made personally for himself at home, and I have copies of that stuff. So I could go into so many different ways, but a lot of the stuff I've listened to, I've shared with my relatives and friends. But other than that, many of those recordings have never been heard before by the average Beatle fan.
if it sounds like the stuff you have, nobody's ever heard.
I wouldn't say nobody, because few people that were in the know in England were able to have access to some of these recordings. And then the person who presented them to me in the United States obviously had access to them also. And he, by the way, let me just tell you about this gentleman. I forget his name at this point, but he owned a record store in the city of El Cajon, California. And it was called Blue Meanie Records. And if anybody had ever seen the movie Yellow Submarine, some of the characters in the movie is called the Blue Meanies. Well, he named the entire record store after the Blue Meanies in Yellow Submarine. So how many record stores would name their record store after a group? That doesn't happen. Anyway, he did it. That's how much of a Beatles fan he was. So much of what I have, he had.
Right. So then, so I'm looking at your collection just from the little bit that I can see behind you, and I see all the singles, and then I see, of course, your picture, which is the cornerstone. But right above it, there's a long slip of paper that's framed. What is that? It looks like almost like a receipt or something.
You know what that is? It's interesting you picked that up. Is that Joel Whitburn, who is the archive of Billboard Top 100 songs. I don't know if you ever heard of Joel Whitman. He has archived all the songs that have ever been on Billboard Hot 100. So you'll see a book like this, the top singles,
Mm-hmm.
and every single that ever hit the Billboard Hot 100 is in this book.
Mm.
And then he sends out supplements as the years go by. And I'm not sure if he's doing this himself, but he's got a company that now does that. These are the singles, and then these are the albums that have ever hit the top 200 of Billboard magazine. When you look at this, every song that has ever been on any album in the rock era is in this book, and it's cross-referenced with the album that it comes from. And the group and what's told about that group is throughout this book. So anyway, what's behind me is Joel Whitburn's ranking of all the Beatles songs that have ever hit Billboard Top 100. What I had to do was extract that information, and I put it on one plaque, took it to a trophy store. They were able to put it on a gold plate, and I framed it.
Wow.
So all the records that are on my wall, they're chronological from left to right as they were being released, and they are in conjunction with that list that you see behind me.
Oh, wow.
And ironically, this is something that's really weird. And boy, you know, life is funny sometimes. But in the vinyl era, there were 45 Beatles singles that were released in the vinyl era. What's unique about that? You know, there's another name for singles, right?
45s.
45s.
Oh, wow.
45.
45,
Yeah.
45s.
And that's one of those trivia questions that you'll never read in a book. People don't realize that. This is maybe the first time that anybody's ever heard that trivia question. How many Beatles singles were released in the vinyl era? And the reason I say that, because they've released promotional stuff that's happened since during the CD era. But during the vinyl era, how many Beatles singles were ever released? The answer is 45.
That we have a trivia show, so that's why I was looking at Zoe or looking.
Yeah, I made note of that.
Okay, and in case you're wondering, all 45 of those records are behind me.
So what are you like? What are you going to do with? So obviously, you know, it's for you to share your love of the Beatles and, you know, talk to people about the Beatles. But, you know, once you pass on, like, what are you going to donate these to a museum? Are they going to go to somebody in your family? Like, how do you want to continue to share your collection after you're gone?
I have kicked out around a lot, and I still haven't come up with a definitive answer. For those close friends of mine, Stormy, and family who have seen them, there's two popular questions once they've made their rounds throughout my home. And one of them is what you just asked. The other is, what's it worth?
Yeah, obviously that was going to be one of our questions.
Those are the two questions.
Yeah.
So what is it worth?
Well, you know, first of all, I've never had it appraised. And
Really?
I've never had it appraised, not professionally appraised. I have some ballpark ideas, but it's like the stock market. It goes up and down depending on what's happening with the Beatles' lives. Unfortunately, they always go way up in value, a premium value, every time a Beatle passes away.
Yeah.
And my next question was going to be, what were you doing on the day you found out that John Lennon was murdered? I
was actually just stepped out of a restaurant, and I had turned on my radio, and I was listening. I don't know if you folks were around during that dreadful evening. I turned on my radio to pick up the Monday Night Football score. It was Monday Night Football, and Howard Cosell, which was being simulcast, said something about John Lennon being shot. And I thought to myself, I hope I didn't hear what I just heard. And it was in the evening, so obviously Monday Night Football. And they went to a commercial, and he came back and he says, I checked my sources and it's true. Unfortunately, I don't know his condition, but John Lennon has been shot. And again, I hark right back to the way I felt when John Kennedy was shot, and what we talked about earlier. It felt that bad. And I was hoping for the best. There was sketchy reports coming from New York. And I was very upset. I was in San Diego at the time. And I don't dwell too much about that moment. However, I will speak about it for a moment, in that I couldn't sleep for a few nights. I felt like a family member had passed. And that weekend at Balboa Park, if you're familiar with San Diego, there was a vigil that weekend for John Lennon. There must have been no less than 50,000 people at Balboa Park, if you know where that's at. It's sort of San Diego's version of Central Park.
Mhm.
And I did attend. I didn't know what to do with my time. I didn't know what else to think. His new album had just been released. And so that music of his latest music was being played everywhere, no matter what station you listen to at the vigil, and that sort of thing. So there has been no less than 30, 40 documentaries on television that have been released. I refuse to watch any of them. That is not my memory of John Lennon. And I won't even go there with who wanted to associate themselves with that moment. It's just not worth my time. So
Right.
that's how upset I am with that whole event.
Right.
So do you think that Yoko Ono broke up the Beatles?
No, I do not. If you're familiar with the events of the Beatles, and I got to tell you, and by the way, you asked me if I ever met any of the Beatles themselves. The answer is no. I'm also a chartered member of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in Cleveland.
Nice.
And I was invited to all the chartered members, that is, where it was invited to attend the grand opening for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. It was not open to the public. It was on Labor Day weekend, 1995. And Yoko Ono was there, along with some of my favorites, Eric Clapton, Tom Petty, Huey Lewis. There was so many people there. And only the chartered members were invited to this ceremony. And a lot of questions, how did you become a chartered member? Well, about 8 years prior to that, they were looking for donations for the building, for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and Museum. And I donated to the building. And I have my name on one of the bricks on the outside of the building, but that didn't really matter as much as attending the grand opening and seeing it before the general public did. Anyway, my point is, I was standing within 3 feet of Yoko Ono. And she's just a real little thing. I mean, she's a very small, petite woman, and was very kind to those that she spoke to. Typically, when I have met or have seen celebrities in the same building I've been in, and I've been to a lot of special events like the Commissioner's Ball for the Super Bowl, and in broadcast booth with Jerry Coleman and Ted Leitner in San Diego for the Padre podcast broadcast. I'm not one to approach them. I sat right next to Bill Walton, the famous pro basketball player, at a Crosby, Stills and Nash and Young concert in San Diego. And I sat right next to him. We both had seats next to each other. And a lot of people were approaching him the entire concert. And about 3/4 into the concert, and by the way, him and I were chatting. And 3/4 into the concert, I said, "Hey, Bill, you ever get tired of that?" And he says, I always have to remember it's these folks that paid my salary. They paid for the ticket. They paid for the broadcast to watch the commercials that the commercials people paid, whoever down the line, I got paid. So I don't forget that. However, I do appreciate it at moments where I'm kind of left alone. So anyway, I didn't approach Yoko Ono, and I'm not one to approach people that don't want or may not expect for me to approach them. And you can imagine how all the Beatles felt shortly after the Lennon incident. They were a bit nervous about being approached unexpectedly.
course.
So I keep all that in mind when before I approach any celebrity, especially somebody like Yoko Ono. But anyway, back to your question. When the Beatles went to India at George Harrison's request to meet the Maharishi and everything that was associated with that, they came back very splintered of what they were going to do next. What also happened in that summer of 1967 is that their manager, Brian Epstein, had passed away unexpectedly. So there was a culture shock for the Beatles. George Harrison had his mind in other places. John Lennon had recently met Yoko Ono, and Paul McCartney was at that point just had begun his relationship with Linda Eastman, and Ringo Starr had some illness in the family that he had to attend to. So their minds were in different places. They had gone to India, they came back, they were getting ready to record the White Album. And they recorded that White Album mostly in 4 separate studios at Abbey Road's studio in separate compartments. And the album was put together. So the writing was on the wall that the Beatles were no longer recording the way they had recorded in the past, a collaboration. Sure, John Lennon and Paul McCartney many times collaborated of how to put songs together, but much of those recordings and from there on after until the Let It Be album was recorded, they were in separate rooms. They recorded some of the Yellow Submarine in separate rooms. The Magical Mystery Tour, those recordings were in separate rooms for the most part. They did come together from time to time, but it wasn't done the same way as it was prior to the Sgt. Pepper album being released. So the splintering had begun. There was some animosity had begun. There was some paranoia amongst each of the Beatles about the other 3 Beatles going on. Different times, George Harrison literally left some of the recording sessions and they couldn't find him for a few days. Ringo Starr left also for those same paranoia reasons. And they didn't know where he was for a few days and had to be brought back. To give you an example of that, the song Back in the USSR was getting ready to be recorded and Ringo went AWOL because he felt paranoid that the other 3 didn't want him there anymore. Why did they feel that way? Because McCartney is a perfectionist. And he stayed on George and he stayed on Ringo to play to their best ability. Well, Ringo just took off and they were getting ready to make that record. So a lot of people don't know this.
Right.
Many Beatle fans do, but Paul McCartney is on drums in the recording you hear of Back in the USSR today. If you heard it on the radio, that is not Ringo. That is Paul McCartney on the drums.
Wow.
Yeah. Another time, both George and Ringo were on holiday, as they say in England, correct, Zoe?
Yes, that's true.
They don't go on vacations over there. They go on holiday.
We do, in fact. I've just come back from holiday.
Okay. Well, George and Ringo were gone, and George and John Lennon had just written a little biography about him and Yoko Ono, and it was called The Ballad of John and Yoko. And John wanted to get it out quickly, and the only one that was in town was Paul. So on that recording, Paul's again playing drums on the song The Ballad of John and Yoko. So when you hear that song, that is not Ringo. And Paul plays bass and drums on that recording, and John Lennon plays rhythm guitar and lead guitar on that. And it's a funny thing, on one of the outtakes, and you could hear them on one of the bootlegs, they kid with each other, and he said, "Did I do that right, Ringo?" "Yeah, you did, George," but they weren't there. They weren't there. They did it as a joke because it was only the 2 of them on that recording.
Love that. That's great.
So anyway.
So no, that's fantastic. That's fucking great stories. That's why we have you on here, because it's amazing the stuff that you know. So do you think that the Beatles music got better when they started doing drugs?
Well, yes.
The reason, Ruben, okay, to qualify the reason why I just asked that question is because that's what I think. I think they got better.
Okay.
When they
and I don't want to promote drug use.
No, of course, we never.
And nor did they. And nor did they. So they were being very careful about drug abuse and make sure that they didn't send out the wrong message. But after a while, they couldn't cover that or cover themselves with that topic. Somebody finally put a microphone in front of Paul McCartney and asked, "Have you ever done LSD?" And Paul's answer was much like mine was right now. It really was. He stuttered for a bit and he thought to himself, and I've heard this from, and by the way, there's tons of books out there about the Beatles and what they thought, what they said. I take very little credence on most of what I hear, unless I hear it from a Beatle themselves in an interview. Right. And anyway, there is a Paul McCartney interview. He thought to himself quickly, how am I going to respond to that? Do I want to talk about the truth? Or do I want to give some glossy, politically correct types answer? And he told the truth. And he said, yes, I have taken LSD. So the follow-up, and that was done at a time while they were making the Rubber Soul and Revolver album. And as George Harrison says, that's A and B. It could have been, the songs could have interchanged. It was shortly after meeting Bob Dylan. And by the way, Bob Dylan asked John Lennon, why don't you start writing, you know, the whole world is paying attention to you. Why don't you write something that means something rather than love songs? And John Lennon was actually getting kind of bored of writing just love songs. And he really took that to heart. And much over the song, many of the songs that you hear on Rubber Soul and the Revolver album is a lot of Bob Dylan and the Byrds, by the way. A lot of their influences of what the Beatles had gained while visiting Los Angeles and meeting Roger McGuinn of the Byrds and David Crosby of the Byrds. At the time, David Crosby was with the Byrds and with Bob Dylan, and took a lot of what he had absorbed with that visit, and you could hear a lot of that sound in those two albums. And during that time was when they started taking drugs. It started off as marijuana, innocently enough, but it moved on with other people that had approached them with new drugs. And a lot of what you see is psychedelic of the 60s ended up on Sgt. Pepper and the Magical Mystery Tour, and the music changed. Right. You saw the transition, by the way, with Rubber Soul and Revolver. And then you saw what came to be with Sgt. Pepper and the Magical Mystery Tour. And it got much more complicated. Their last concert, which they were totally bored of doing, came at Candlestick Park in August 29th or 30th. I have a poster right here of that last concert. 1966. They were shamed out of the Philippines by the Marcos family because they wanted a private concert for the Beatles to perform at the Palace, and they refused to do it. So they were getting a lot of bad vibes of what was happening in concert.
Why, real quick, I'm sorry, Ruben, why did they refuse to perform?
Because it was their day off.
Oh.
And Paul McCartney said it best. He says, we didn't get very many days off, and when we got one, we needed it. And it wasn't on the schedule. Brian Epstein at the time, their manager, by the way, had not scheduled it. And it was a smoke and mirrors invitation. They were asked if they would like to join them for dinner. And through the grapevine, they heard it wasn't just for dinner, it was to perform. And even if it was for dinner, Paul said, you know, we've gone to enough royal galas, royalty type galas in different countries they had visited, that it was their day off. And they didn't want to have to be on their A game to show up there. So they declined. And basically, the federal government was told to treat the Beatles like they would any other citizen visiting the Philippines. Well, unfortunately, a lot of the roadies and other people that were coming along with the Beatles were kind of manhandled a little bit. And George Harrison said, is this the way by manhandling our staff, is this the way you treat your average visitor in the Philippines? Don't think so. So they left very upset with the way they were treating the Philippines. They were upset with concerts. George and John were done with concerts and flying back, coming back to England. John had said, that's my last concert. Take that back. Coming back from San Francisco to England, said, I'm done with concerts. we don't, George and I have already decided we're not doing it anymore. We think Ringo will go along with this. And Paul had a funny idea in his mind just prior, within days of John saying this to him, was, I'm actually getting tired of being a Beatle. And Paul McCartney had this idea and took what John had just said to him and had a conversation with him on the plane back to England and said, you know, I have this idea that we don't have to be the Beatles anymore. Let's be somebody else. And what he did, he took that idea and thought, who is that somebody else going to be? Well, there was these long named groups, the Medicine, a Big Brother and the Holding Company, these long names that come from the United States, and came up with, by the way, he was having dinner with one of the roadies just prior to that plane trip, and had asked for somebody to pass the salt and pepper as they were sitting down having a meal. And Paul started laughing. And he said, what is that? And he says, and the roadie said to him, please pass the salt and pepper, Paul. And he said, oh, I thought you said something about pass the Sergeant Pepper. And that's how the name came up. That's how the name came to be. And on that, going back to that plane trip with John, says, you know, we don't have to be the Beatles. I kind of came up with the name of somebody else that we can be. And Paul said, well, what are you talking about? He says, well, you know, these long names that these rock groups have in America, why don't we be, and this is the name I came up with, Sergeant Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. And that's the name of their new band. And that's what they took took that name to their new album. And by the way, their album was released on June 1st, 1967 in England, and June 2nd in 1967 here in the United States. It wasn't uncommon for the releases to be separate, by the way. England typically had first shot, but not always. There was a few exceptions to that the U.S. got a chance to listen to these releases prior to England. My favorite radio station at the time I was listening to, I was raised in Southern California, and my favorite radio station was 93 KHJ, which wanted me to become a disc jockey as an adult. I did. Long story short, I didn't become one, but professionally. But I did work at my college radio and TV stations. One at Mount San Antonio College in Walnut, and the other at San Diego State University. And it was kind of funny because when the Beatles made it big in '64, I was in the 8th or 9th grade, and I remember our principal, Mr. Johnson, came into one of my classrooms, and if you recall, these kind of conversations went around asking the kids, what do they want to be when they grow up? A lot of them wanted to be what their parents were. There was a lot of the girls wanted to be nurses. A lot of the guys wanted to be policemen or firemen. And when he came around to me, I told him I wanted to be a disc jockey. And he started laughing. He looked at my teacher. He says, who is this kid? What, a disc jockey? And he says, yeah, he talks about music a lot. You know, I had to, when I was in the 3rd grade, I had to sneak I Want to Hold Your Hand into the classroom, because we used to have these record players at the classroom, which a lot of, back in that age group, there was like these little kiddie 45s that the teacher on Friday afternoons, it was, if we were good kids, we got to listen to these little kiddie records. But the first week, or in January, it was, I bought I Want to Hold Your Hand. I was a huge Beatle fan even at that age. And I had told a few of the other kids I had bought the record. Well, a lot of their parents, by the way, this is something you may not know. A lot of parents did not like the Beatles, but the kids loved them. They saw them as long-haired, dirty type people. Yeah. And they were not well received by a different age group. Well, anyway, I was very fortunate to have siblings who were older than me, and raised by some folks that were liberal enough to not keep that from me. So I bought my first 45 at a record store in Pomona, California, called Mr. Mac Record Store. I remember buying it. It was a big event for me. And when I went to school the following Monday, I had told some kids I Want to Hold Your Hand by the Beatles. And they wanted me to bring it to record sharing on Friday afternoon. Because everybody was going to be in their best behavior. Well, I had to clear it with the teacher. The teacher didn't want to ask the principal if that was okay to bring a rock record to school. And so what she did, and by the way, I had a good relationship with her. I first had to sneak it out of my house because I wasn't sure if I was going to be allowed to take the record out of the house. And then I snuck into the school and I hid it on I think it was a Thursday, the day before, to make sure I really had it there. And on Friday, and her name was Mrs. Smith. Actually, was that general? Her name was Mrs. Smith. And all the other kids were bugging Mrs. Smith. Ruben brought "I Want to Hold Your Hand" by the Beatles, and she said, "Well, I'm not sure if I can play it." Anyway, long story short, she closed all the windows, closed the door. And luckily it was the winter. And she said, "Okay, you kids were really good all day because I know you want to hear this record." And she played "I Want to Hold Your Hand" by the Beatles. So that was a big deal. Anyway, going back to what I wanted to do in life, when the principal came around and said, "What does he want? Is he serious? He wants to be a disc jockey?" And she said, "Oh yeah. He really loves the Beatles. He's really into music, and now he wants to be a disc jockey when he grows up."
So then here's the question, Ruben, and you can answer this however you want to, or you can avoid the question completely. Were the Beatles bigger than Jesus Christ?
No, and that was totally taken on to context. And that brings me right back to, don't believe what you read. Somebody, and I'm going to paraphrase, and I am the last person to speak for any of the Beatles, but a microphone who John Lennon considered a friend, a publicist who they've had previous interviews, said something about what do you have to say to today's youth, or something along these lines, and compare them to Jesus Christ. Well, John Lennon was actually embarrassed that the Beatles had become so popular that they may be more popular among certain circles than Jesus Christ. Well, the reporter took that information and twisted a few words around and said, John Lennon says we're bigger than Jesus Christ. And that is not what he said. And there is plenty of evidence to show that that is not what he said. That is not even what he meant. He actually was embarrassed that amongst some circles, they may be more popular than Jesus Christ, and was not proud of it, was not making a claim of any sort, but just reported or just responded to the reporter's question. And unfortunately, it took him a year to finally get his message out that is not what he had said.
I am so glad to hear that, not because the Jesus Christ reference, but just because that's how I've always heard it. And to hear, no, actually somebody fucked him, who he trusted as a friend, and then took their words and twisted it. And, it's just, I guess it's a little bit of vindication for John, even though now it's irrelevant, of course, but the fact that, no, he didn't say that, you completely twisted that, you know what I mean? So, yeah.
Mel, before we run out of time, I would love for Ruben, because he had his cell phone, I would love for Ruben to show some of his pieces that he doesn't mind sharing, some of the pieces that he's most proud of, if you wouldn't mind, Ruben.
Yeah.
I just think that would be pretty. Make sure before you do it, though, be sure you mute the sound on your computer. But what were you going to say before then? I just want to make sure we don't run out of time.
Okay. Well, this is my one last question, and then I'm going to turn it over to Zoe. So I love Tom Petty. And you mentioned Tom Petty. What did you think of the Traveling Wilburys? So for those of you who don't know, the Traveling Wilburys was a super group that Tom Petty and George Harrison and the gentleman from Electric Light Orchestra, I think, was in, and Roy Orbison.
Jeff Lynne.
And Dylan, right?
Huh?
And Dylan and Bob
Dylan.
Yep. So
and Roy Orbison.
And Roy Orbison, right. So what did you think of the Traveling Wilburys?
Oh, they were fabulous. And, there's a lot of super groups out there. And probably one of the first super groups was the Buffalo Springfield in the 60s. And then you had Crosby, Stills, and Nash. And there's other groups that have collaborated and have become a super group. And of all the super groups, the Traveling Wilburys may be my very favorite.
Yeah, I love them too. Okay, Zoe, I'm kicking it over to you. That was a vanity question. That was pure vanity question. So go ahead, Zoe.
Yeah, I just have a quick couple of questions. Have you ever been able to travel to England?
No, but funny you said that. My wife wants for me to travel to Europe. And I said, and I've thought to myself, and I've always thought, if I ever go to Europe, the one place I want to visit is Abbey Road Studios. I understand there's a tour there, and I'd love to take the tour. And I understand one of the most popular spots is where the Beatles walked across Abbey Road. And it's funny, the album is called Abbey Road, but a lot of people don't even realize they were recording at Abbey Road Studios. Prior to the Abbey Road Studios, I believe it was called EMI Studios. So you may hear the two, but it's the same building.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's just so iconic. And there's so many different photographs of different people doing different things walking across.
Yeah,
Abbey Road.
absolutely. I understand it's a tourist area and that cars can't drive by because 24/7 people are trying to take their pictures,
trying to do their pictures
of them walking across as the Beatles did in the front of Abbey Road, the Abbey Road album. Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, you'd have to go there, and obviously you have to go to Liverpool to the Cavern Club if you could. And
I understand there's a hotel in Liverpool, and you may, I don't know if you are aware of this or collaborate this, but there's I understand there's a hotel, and I don't know if it's still open, but I understand the hotel is a small hotel in Liverpool. It consists of like 36 rooms, and each room has a different song theme of the Beatles. So you could be sleeping in the Strawberry Fields room,
right.
or you could be sleeping in the Penny Lane room. And the decor and the picture and the colors and look much like what you would see on their albums in that era. So I don't know if it's still there. I read about it many years ago, but if I ever make it to Liverpool, I'm going to check that out.
Oh yeah, I don't know either. And I was brought up down south, not up north, but that sounds like a fabulous idea. Yeah, something you'd have to do for sure. How many times did you get to see them live?
Okay, well, I've never, when the Beatles stopped touring, I was 10 years old.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Okay.
And they stopped touring in 1966. And I was born in 56. So I feel like I just missed the age to be able to go. And ironically, their second to the last concert was at Dodger Stadium. And I'm a huge Dodger fan, for those of you who know who I am. And I had been to Dodger Stadium at that age to see Sandy Koufax pitch several times, and Don Drysdale, for those of you who are old Dodger fans. So it wasn't unheard of for me to get to Dodger Stadium, but didn't have the means at the time. And I did know they were playing there, but I just wasn't old enough, I think, to ever go to a concert at that age.
Right. Yes, you're too young. And what's your favorite Beatles song, if you can?
I actually can.
You can?
And that's actually another popular question. Only two of, and as big of a Beatle fan as I am, only two of their songs make my top 10 of all time favorite songs. So, you would think all 10 would be Beatles. No. Yeah. I'm a rock fan first, really.
Right.
And then I'm a Beatles fan next. But the two of the top three songs are Beatles songs. And that my number 3 song of all time is A Day in the Life.
Okay.
And for a lot of reasons. You can listen to that song 100 times and still learn from that song. And that's what I like about a lot of their music, is that not so much the early stuff, but their later stuff, is that you can listen to it and all of a sudden you're hearing things you've never heard before. And Stormy can tell you, we were in the same business. I put together a stereo system just so I can listen to the nuances and music that I couldn't hear when I was growing up. So for me, it's like hearing it all over again. So anyway, A Day in the Life is number 3, my favorite of all music of all time. And let me just get into this real quickly. It's very rare that John writes a song where the first 1/3 and the back 1/3 is John and the middle third is Paul. And Paul wrote the middle third of A Day in the Life. And there was George Martin, the producer of the Beatles, were doing things on that song that had never been done before, with orchestras and background sounds. And it's just an incredible song. And that's number 3 of all my favorites.
Right.
Number 1 is Come Together. And it's for a lot of reasons. I can still, what I like best about the Beatles music, especially towards the latter part of their career, is that they didn't make a lot of sense to every line that they wrote. It meant different things to different people.
Right.
What does 1 and 1 and 1 is 3 mean when there's 4 Beatles, right? So you can come up with your own conclusion. There's a whole, I could spend an hour of talking about the era of when Paul was dead. And for those of you who know, there was a rumor, a very a very logical rumor why people thought Paul McCartney had died in 1969. And that's one of the clues, by the way, supposedly, is that in Come Together, they say 1 and 1 and 1 is 3, like there's only 3 Beatles left.
Right.
If you look on Abbey Road, the cover of Abbey Road, there's a station wagon with the license plate with Paul McCartney's initials, and at the last 2 digits is 28, because that's how old he would have been had he died that year. So, and then at the end of Strawberry Fields, Ringo is saying cranberry sauce, or is it a strawberry? Yeah, Strawberry Fields, or I Am the Walrus, one of the two. So, cranberry sauce, but it's so faintly heard that you can also interpret it by saying Paul is dead. So there was so many things out there, these little nuanced things that if you put it together, for instance, on the video, Your Mother Should Know, the Beatles are walking down the stair steps. Well, 3 of the Beatles are wearing red carnations. Paul's wearing a black one. There's another clue.
Right.
If you look at Abbey Road on the 4 Beatles walking across the street, Paul's the only one that's barefooted, because you get buried barefooted, not with your shoes on.
Right.
So if he was dead, that must be why he's barefooted. There was all these clues out there. And by the way, when you look at Abbey Road, the 4 of them have to do with the funeral. John is dressed as a minister. As a caretaker. Ringo is dressed as sort of a minister type guy. If you look at George, he's dressed as a grave digger. He's wearing jeans and he's wearing denim. He's the grave digger, and Paul's in a suit that's barefooted.
Right.
And many people get buried with a suit on that's barefooted. So go back and look at that album cover, and you can see why the clues were there of why Paul must be dead.
What I'm going to do real quick, Ruben.
Can I just tell him what my favorite Beatles song
Oh,
is?
let's hear.
Oh, no one cares.
What?
No, I care.
Ruben, my favorite is Hey Jude. I shriek that song every time it comes on. I just love it.
So let me ask you this question. What inspired Paul to write Hey Jude?
I don't know. Oh, I want to know if I don't know if I ever knew. I don't remember. By the way,
I'm full of trivia. We could go on forever, but I'll stop at this one.
Okay, tell me.
Paul was on his way to go visit Julian to console him because his dad was going and his parents were going through a divorce. So while he was driving to see Julian, he was thinking, I'm going to come up with a little maybe nursery rhyme, and I'm going to name it after him. And a long story short, he came up with a little song, which we now know as Hey Jude, but it was originally named Hey Jules, and for Julian. Right. But Paul, as he was refining the song, and by the way, he sang it to him when he's met him, thought there was too much of a mouthful, according to Paul. When you keep saying Hey Jules, it's almost like you have to spit on the microphone. So he shortened it to Hey, and more concise. Instead of Jules, became Hey Jude. So there's the answer.
So for those of you who have been listening and you're dying to see some of Ruben's collection, head over to our YouTube channel where he's going to share some of it with us, and you guys will be blown away. Thanks for listening.
This is my 45/45s. And like I mentioned earlier, they're in chronological order with I Want to Hold Your Hand. So here are some of the rare small labels. There's Swan. There's VJ. By the way, they were also on MGM, which was larger. And Tolly Records. There's Twist and Shout. Do You Want to Know a Secret? There's another Tolly, Love Me Do. And then here's another MGM. And then for the most part after that is Capitol.
Okay.
And then Capitol re-released this, and I'm going to kind of give you an aerial view of what this wall looks like.
Wow.
Can you see that?
Yeah.
That's pretty impressive.
Okay.
Impressive.
So there's the 45 singles. And as we walk through the Capitol years, you'll see that. And I'll go back to that picture here in a minute. But and then we go over to the Apple years, and there's a whole story of the transition from Capitol to Apple, which was the Beatles label. And there's also a whole story with Steve Jobs and Apple and the litigation between Apple Records and Apple Computers and iTunes. There's a whole story there. And it was pretty interesting because Steve Jobs was a huge Beatle fan and unfortunately had to go to court against them, or had to defend himself, I should say. Okay, so anyway, there's the 45s. And if I go up on top are my vinyl bootleg records. And you'll see covers there you may have never seen before.
And it's much like the music that was inside of them, and it's music you've never seen before or you've never heard before. So we will go through the top there, and you can see, and over to the right, they're just rarity type. These are all vinyl records. So you can see that up on top. And then I'm going to transition over to my Lost Lennon tapes, which are rare John Lennon recordings. Most of these were recorded at his home on cassettes and reel-to-reels. And through the grapevine, I was able to get them because if somebody put them on vinyl, and you'll see pictures of John Lennon there you may have never seen before.
I haven't.
Okay, can you see that?
Yeah, it's very clear.
Yeah, we
Okay, okay, so those are kind of high up there. Okay, good. So those are my John Lennon bootlegs, my Beetle bootlegs. These are all recordings that a lot of people have never heard before. These are covers you may have never seen before. This was kind of interesting. This was released in England, and the Beatles are on one side and the Rolling Stones are on the other.
No way.
Yeah, can you guys see that?
Yeah.
It says the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. That will be something you never see.
No.
Also,
Wow.
each year, the Beatle fans received a Christmas recording from the Beatles. They did it for 7 years. And then somebody put it all those recordings on one album called the Beatles Christmas Album. So those Christmas recordings, which were singles, were put together in an album, never released commercially as far as I know.
Wow.
So can you see that?
Yeah, we can see them clear.
Okay, great. All right, I'm going to slide over to these movie posters. They're marquee posters. What's unusual about these 4 posters, the Beatles made 4 movies. A Hard Day's Night, Help, the Yellow Submarine, and Let It Be. You see those?
Yeah.
What's unique about these is that in the 60s, when you'd go to the snack bar and go get your popcorn, they would have these little counter posters of the movie that they were showing next. These are really hard to find. The big marquee ones that were in front of the building are much easier to find than these snack bar posters. And a buddy of mine who I ran into many years ago was a marquee movie poster guy. And I asked him about these, if he had ever seen them. He says, yeah, few and far between. Long story short, it took him about 10 years, but he found all 4 of the Beatle movies and got them for me.
Wow.
And those are the snack bar posters. And then I have some other memorabilia of and collectible items. And one of the most unique items is, let me see if I can find it real quick.
Wow.
Pretty interesting. I have an 8-track of Sgt. Pepper that's still in the cellophane.
Wow.
And I have all these 8-tracks. But believe it or not, I've never owned an 8-track player. But I can't find it. It's here someplace.
My mom had an 8-track player. Yeah.
Yeah. So I found one about 30 years ago, still in the cellophane. And I thought I'd better pick it up. I may not get a chance to do that. And these are just collectible type items, decor type item of the Beatles stuff that I've collected through the years. And these are just kind of, by the way, this poster was recently released just a couple of years ago. And it's a rare picture of the Beatles recording the Sgt. Pepper album. So I thought I'd better pick that up. And that's really cool. What I like about it is if you could see, John Lennon's looking at you. And he's on the piano and he's looking at you, which is kind of cool. And then let me just go back to the Ed Sullivan. This is the rare outtake picture of the moments before the Beatles were going to perform on the Ed Sullivan Show. Very cool picture, very clear. And like I said, I was very fortunate because I picked up the number 2 of the 2500. So I was kind of happy about that. So I thought that was worth framing. So that is that room. And I'll go into another room.
Does your wife like the Beatles too?
Yeah, I think she always has, but she's even bigger fan now.
She'd have to be, right?
Yeah. So of course you would gather that my favorite song is from my favorite album. And my favorite album is Abbey Road. And by the way, we talked about the Beatles crossing the street. Well, here they are.
Oh,
and
yeah.
I see how somebody may want to interpret that as a funeral. You can see John and as the mortician, and Ringo as the clergy, and George as the gravedigger, and there's Paul with the suit on, who's barefooted. And this particular one, Zoe, you probably know the answer. This particular single and album is from England. How would you know that?
Yeah, you're going to have to tell me.
It's the 45 has a small hole.
45 has a small hole. And then on my Beetle wall, I have the different formats, the CD, the cassette, the 8-track, and on top, which is kind of hard to find these days, is the reel-to-reel of Abbey Road.
Mm.
And then this is again, the famous Abbey Road picture. But when they went back and forth on that day, they took that picture. They went back and forth and took 7 pictures. So which means there was 6 outtakes. Of the 6 outtakes, I have one of them right here.
How
And that's one of
cool.
the outtakes. And what's unusual about, you can see all kinds of differences in these outtakes if you look closely.
He's
First
got
of all,
shoes on.
their legs aren't as symmetrical as they are on the one that they decided on. And Paul McCartney is wearing sandals. You see that?
Yeah.
Yep. Yep.
The story behind that is that Paul said it was a hot day and they were going back and forth. He decided to kick them off, and he did. So that's the picture that they used on the one that was released. And also on this Abbey Road, another really unique album. It's a picture disc, and the sleeve is part of the picture. So when you remove the picture disc out, it's just the sleeve with the big hole around it. So anyway, you have to put the album in to have it complete.
Right.
So there's that. And by the way, I had, and there's another whole story here. I actually knew the guy that gold plated with 24 karat gold vinyl records for the RIAA. Are you familiar with that organization?
Isn't that the independent artist something?
Yeah, they're the ones that certify when an album's gone gold and platinum. The guy that I told you how things lined up in my life. I met the guy that had the contract for RIAA, and him and I got to be such good buddies, and he knew I was a Beatle fan. He gold plated my entire Beatle collection.
Oh, wow.
And one of the things he did for me was my favorite record. Remember I said remember what it was?
Well, it was Abbey Road was your favorite record, but you said your favorite song?
Favorite song, right.
Right. Was the Day and Night.
That was number 3. Come Together was number 1.
Together.
Come together. Hey, Ruben.
So
Hey, just so you know, because we are on a time limit, we probably got about 3 more minutes, 3 or 4
Okay.
more minutes probably. So
I'll run
it
through
sucks because I'd rather keep us here an hour because this is great,
Okay.
but we have to.
Okay, I'm going to run through it real quick then.
Okay.
Here we go. You ready?
Yep.
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 These are 21 albums. They're all picture discs. These are very hard to find. They come from all over the world. They were all purchased prior to the internet, and I literally had to go on Goldmine Records to find all these. These are all albums. They can all be played on their turntable. If you look closely, there's a hole in each one of those.
Yep.
So this is the picture disc wall of all the albums. And then the Beatles released one double album, the White Album, also the greatest hits. These are my double albums, and the White Album in 24 karat gold. I don't know if that comes out okay.
No, it comes
Yeah.
out good.
Yeah.
Okay, I picked up this backlit poster from, if you remember, the Music Plus stores.
Yep.
And I got the manager to give it to me, and I had the cabinet made, so it lights from behind, and it's really cool. When they released all the CDs, which were in different times, and then when they were all finally done, they released them. This poster was made, and I got a copy of this backlit poster. These are different formats, and each format is 2 songs on it. There's a cassette, there's a 2-song CD, and of course the 45, which is a picture disc 45.
Hey, Jude.
And this is Hey Jude. Let's
Woo!
see. What's here? I know it's here.
I just
yeah.
saw it.
The first
Yeah.
one.
Yeah.
So I put them in shadow boxes, and this is the collection, and each shadow box has got the 2 songs in them. Yeah, I don't know how that's coming out, but
Yeah.
This
We,
is-
Coming out good.
yeah.
okay. So
I
these
love
are
how
my
it's all
2-song
displayed.
walls. All right, real quick. These are hand painted plates with 24 karat gold trim, all Beetle plates. See those
Wow.
okay?
Yeah.
Okay, and then here's my lunchbox collection, Beetle lunchboxes,
Nice. I love it.
lunchbox collection. Okay,
Yep.
and then finally, this is my 24 karat gold wall album of the entire Beetle library in 24 karat gold.
Wow.
Oh, my
Every album is on this wall with the exception of the White Album, which you've already seen.
Yeah.
So these are all 24 karat gold. The beauty of these being made like this, they're on the actual album. And I've heard these before. When you put them on a turntable, they don't lose an ounce of fidelity. They can all be played. There's a lot of knockoffs out there that are made on acetates.
Uh-huh.
These are the actual vinyl albums the Beatles recorded, and I had them all 24 karat plated for me. Luckily, I had that connection with the guy with the RIAA because he doesn't do this for just anybody. In fact, he didn't do it for anybody, but he did it for me.
Wow.
That's magnificent.
So that is my collection for the most part there. Oh, okay. I got to show you one more. This, I dedicated my front door to John Lennon.
Oh, look.
Hey, Ruben, really quick, just on the side note, can you show us one of the things? I just saw another album wall where it looks like they were numbered, because this will go back to what you said across from the gold wall. I know it's not Beatles, but I think it's just kind of a cool little way to close things off. Turn around this wall right here, just super.
I've ranked my
quick.
top 30 artists of all time, and they're in alphabetical order right here. And I've
Stevie
dedicated
Wonder.
this wall as my personal Hall of Fame, and my Hall of Fame is in my wall. So other than the Beatles, obviously number one, these are my top 30 other artists. And I'll give you an aerial view of this.
Chicago.
It starts in alphabetical order with Eric Burdon and the Animals, Chuck Berry, Chicago, Buffalo, Springfield, and here they are. And here's my Hall of Fame hall.
Cool.
Love it. I love all the music throughout your house.
And they're all kind of named like they're Led Zeppelin.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, okay.
Cool. Ruben, thank you so much for coming to the show and just sharing and dropping some knowledge bombs. This was freaking awesome. For those of you who don't mean this, absolutely, this was awesome, Ruben, but we do have to cut it. I was going to say cut it short, but we're not cutting it short. We have to cut it because we do have to stay on a time limit.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you so much for coming on, Ruben, and sharing your collection with us and all of the knowledge and everything. And my wheels are spinning on how to have you back on in a different context. So we'll see how that flashes out. But I appreciate you coming on.
It's been amazing. Thank you, Ruben. I want to come to your house.
All right.
You have to travel state lines, but we can do that. They'll let you in. So we'll see you later, Ruben. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks for listening. If you like us, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.